It's lovely to see you all, to recognize a few faces who we've met over the past couple of weeks, but also to welcome new friends online. My name is Bobby White, and I work here at the Raspberry Pi Foundation. And as I said, I'll be chairing this seminar. I'm very excited to welcome you to our 8th seminar of this series, which we're looking at primary computing, so K through 5. So in a sense, computing education for primary age learners. We would broadly understand that as 5 to 11-year-old students. So that's our theme. And in a sense, we're exploring how research can help us support young learners and teachers in the teaching and learning of computing education. I'm delighted to introduce our speaker, Katharine Childs. Now, Katharine's a member of our research team here at the Raspberry Pi Foundation, and she specializes in projects aimed at broadening participation in computing, with a particular emphasis on gender balance and culturally relevant teaching. Katharine has a strong background in both computer science and education, and she brings a wealth of experience from her work in the IT sector, her teaching in primary schools, and her research interests focusing on gender balance, inclusivity in programming, and physical computing. We are very much excited to hear Katharine speaking about one of our most recent research studies. In her seminar, she will explore the challenges in computer science education and the role of culturally relevant pedagogy in promoting equitable learning. She'll explain how our ongoing work in the UK emphasises the need for professional development among primary teachers to apply culturally relevant pedagogy effectively in lesson resources, and she'll walk us through a hands-on activity to adapt activities for cultural relevance. So, over to you, Katharine, and thanks for coming.
As I say, thank you for that introduction, Bobby. We're keeping things in-house a little bit today, but it's great that you get to see so many members of our team all working together to share research insights with everybody. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the research centre that we're part of and the work that we've done to date in culturally relevant pedagogy. So we're all part of the Raspberry Pi Computing Education Research Centre, which is a joint initiative between the University of Cambridge and the Raspberry Pi Foundation. And one of the aims of the centre is this: to increase our understanding of teaching and learning computing, computer science and associated subjects, with a particular focus on young people who are from backgrounds that are traditionally underrepresented in the field of computing, or who experience educational disadvantage. And that's why one of the strands that we focus on in our research work is localising culturally relevant pedagogy for computing in England. So why do we do this? Well, there are some examples here of the ways that sometimes education can have unequal outcomes from learners from diverse backgrounds. So, for example, in 2019, our report found that there was a 13% attainment gap between the likelihood of white students and students from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds getting a first or a 2-1 degree at university. More recently, 95% of respondents to a survey believed that the UK's curriculum neglects Black lives and experiences. And that was in a report that was just published last month called Black British Voices. And also very recently, research that's been undertaken by Lee Elliott Major, that's also just been published, has been looking at how equity approaches to education also extend to social class, and thinking about how schools must do more to challenge unconscious bias against children from working class backgrounds. So thinking about computing itself, what do we know about diversity in computing? Well, data from England shows a wide disparity of outcomes for students with diverse cultural backgrounds. England has had computing as a mandatory subject in the curriculum since 2014. So all children from the ages of 5 and upwards should learn computing in school. But access to education is not the same as equity in education. And we can see from the statistics that there are still fewer females, fewer Black students, and fewer ethnic minority students taking formal computer science qualifications and working in IT in England. For those of you joining us from around the world, I hope you'll have access to similar statistics and similar data in your own countries, and that you'll be thinking about who is represented amongst your students, and importantly, who isn't represented amongst your students as well. So before this seminar, we ran a couple of polls on social media, and we asked followers of our accounts, who are mostly educators, we asked them this question: do you think culturally adapted resources in primary computer science are important? And it was really interesting, actually, because the results varied a little bit in between LinkedIn and X, or Twitter, whatever we call it now. So on LinkedIn, about 2/3 of respondents agreed, and around half of respondents on Twitter agreed with this statement, along with some uncertainty. Now, we know that online polls aren't reliable or a valid source of empirical data, right? Because you can never be certain about who's voting in them. But they do give us an indication that this is an important topic for educators. And the uncertainty in some of the answers suggests a need to explain more, to research more, and explore more how this theme and this topic can be brought to computing education. So we've been working on culturally relevant pedagogy for computing since 2021. And this is a summary of a couple of the projects that we've been involved in so far. I'm actually delighted that we haven't asked them to be here specifically, but we do have members on the call who have taken part in these research projects as well. And it's lovely to have you with us today. So in 2021, we ran an initial project to develop a set of guidelines for localising culturally relevant pedagogy in England. And that was done by a group of researchers and teachers who worked together to explore ideas and think about how they would apply to the English national curriculum. A further research project then took place in 2022, and that involved operationalising those guidelines into 10 areas of opportunity that can be used to prompt teachers to reflect on how to adapt their teaching to be culturally relevant to their learners. And we ran a study with 19 teachers, both from primary schools and secondary schools, to explore how to use those areas of opportunity in their teaching. One of the things that we did as part of that project was that we created a short video to explain what culturally relevant pedagogy looks like in English schools.
It was empowering to show other people about my culture. Also, it was very informative because I learned about a lot of other people's. I think it was a good exercise for everyone to learn about each other.
How do you feel about computing projects that bring in themes that are personal to you?
They wrote about where they're from, what their festivals are, what their food is. So the website was about that students' culture.
We met with fellow educators across the UK and the US, and academics as well, to talk about how to make our beautiful subject culturally relevant. Why not make your curriculum accessible? Why not make it, diverse? Why not make it inclusive? We came up with at least 9 to 10 guidelines that we were happy with, all of us as a group. And then we linked each of the guidelines to the Teach Computing curriculum. And then we're in a position where we came up with something that was suitable and sustainable and that could be shared with schools across the UK, and something that I'm really proud of to be involved in.
We know that in computing careers and also in qualifications that there are a number of different groups in society that are really underrepresented. So certain ethnic minorities, females are underrepresented in these areas. This idea of culturally relevant pedagogy is a way of trying to engage these different groups, of making computing feel relevant to them and making them feel like they belong to computing as a discipline.
History of computer science is normally about British people, not really anyone from ethnic minorities that actually do have a really big contribution to computer science.
I can't tell you how many times I've been in lessons and all they've done is talk about old white men.
Cultural identity traditionally may be associated more with race and ethnicity, However, it's wider than that. It's about applying an intersectional lens to the lived experiences, behaviours, attitudes that young people bring in the classroom, and finding ways to capitalise on them to help them thrive in real life.
We do a lot of discussion with the students. I like to discuss things with the student. I like to hear what they've got to say.
We all go in the middle, like the classroom, and Miss explains it as a class. We all try to answer the questions as a group, and like, say for example, she'd give us like a format, like an algorithm, and we basically answer it together.
We're really hoping that these guidelines can form the basis of a more discussion-based, collaborative approach between teachers and students, so that they can start having some quite complex and maybe sensitive discussions about things that really matter to them. And we hope that this can really empower the young people to take these conversations out into the world and really feel like they can use technology to achieve their goals and to help themselves and to help other people.
Lots of food for thought there, so I'm sure you'll agree. So these slides will be circulated to you all after the seminar. And on this side, I've just added some links for some of the other formats that we've produced work in around this area so far, including a poster, the video that you've just watched, the guidelines that we've created, and 2 academic papers that we've written. So that's the summary of our work so far in 2021 and 2021 and 2022. And one of the findings that came out of the research that we wanted to explore further was how we work particularly with primary teachers. In England, primary teachers are often not specialist computing teachers. They often teach all the different subjects in the curriculum as a generalist. And we came up with some ideas, which we mapped out onto this slide. This is just a range from our first impressions, and it's not something that's a model for literature or anything like that. This was just to spark discussion as we started discussing this. So we picked up on things like age, ethnicity, religious beliefs, family background. I know that was mentioned in the answers. Where you live, that was definitely mentioned. Race and gender. We also thought of things like interests, extracurricular clubs. We didn't think of food. I feel like that was an oversight. We probably should have done. But there's one bubble on here which I think was referenced in some of the comments as well, to do with youth culture, which is a really important part of the cultural identity of the children and the young people that we work with in computing. And it's really important to bear that in mind, that this is the culture of the students, not of the teachers. So in England, we had quite a famous children's television programme called Blue Peter. And from this, we developed a number of different catchphrases, including, here's one I made earlier. And I lost count of the number of times that I heard that in the primary classroom when I was teaching. But I have to bear in mind that that's something from my childhood. It's not something that's necessarily part of children and young people's childhood as much these days. It's not perhaps the big cultural reference point that it used to be. And so that's just one example of thinking about how we need to be really careful in thinking about how we reflect on our own cultural identity, and then think about what the similarities are and also what the differences are with the cultural identities of the young people that we teach. So thank you all so much for your contributions in the chat. That was really great. Now we're going to go and talk, move on a little bit, and I'm going to start talking about the particular study that we ran. So this was a pilot study to localise professional development for teachers in England. And to the best of our knowledge, this is the first time that this type of professional development has been conducted with computing teachers to introduce culturally relevant pedagogy. I just want to give a shout out to all the team who worked on this project, which includes Bonnie and Bobby, who are both on the call, and also Hayley and Jane and Sue. And I also want to say thank you to Linda and Andrea, who had a contribution towards this project, as well as thanking very, very importantly, Cognizant, who kindly funded this study for us. So this is what the study has involved. It's been a one-year research project, all about exploring how primary teachers adapt computing resources to make them culturally responsive to their learners. In the seminar today, we're just focusing on the first part that's indicated by the red arrow. So that was a workshop, a one-day workshop for teachers, which took place in autumn 2022. There is other work that we've done since then. We've adapted some resources. The teachers have delivered them in the classroom. And then over the summer, we interviewed the teachers. We also ran a parent survey and we ran some student focus groups to explore what effect these culturally adapted resources have had. We're still working on analysing the results of those, so we're going to report on that in future work. So for now, we're just thinking about the workshop, the professional development that teachers took part in. So I want to explore a little bit more about the theory that underpins our work now. And first of all, I want to talk about culturally relevant and responsive theories in computing and in education. So on this slide, we can see American theorist and educator Professor Gloria Ladson-Billings, who introduced the idea of culturally relevant pedagogy in her academic work. And culturally relevant pedagogy is based on three core sort of fundamental pillars. Academic achievement for all students, especially those from underrepresented groups. Secondly, that teaching must help students to develop their cultural competence and help them understand their cultural identity that we've just been talking about. And thirdly, that teaching must develop students' critical consciousness to examine and explore what they're being taught through a lens of justice and fairness. Further work in the field of computing education research has explored how to transfer these ideas into the classroom. So we have, for example, culturally responsive teaching and then culturally responsive computing, which have both been sort of developed as a kind of moving on these ideas and making them more and more specific. And then even more specific, we've had work to localise that in England that I've previously referred to as well. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what the situation is here in England. And as I do so, I would like to just invite you to reflect on the country that you're watching this seminar in. You may have similar initiatives with different names, and you may be able to recognise from this table where they would fit into which column. So when we look at equity education in England, we can see three broadly different approaches. First of all, there's multicultural education. So multicultural education is about celebrating the diversity of the learners that we teach and promoting social harmony amongst different communities. So examples of that we have specifically in England are the Ofsted Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Statement and a set of British values that must be taught in all schools. And you can see those in the left-hand column. In the middle column, we have this idea of social justice education. And an example of that in England at the moment that is, there's a lot of work going on, is this idea of decolonising the curriculum. Much of that work is taking place in higher education and universities. And that's around recognising where there are existing biases in education systems and thinking about how to interrupt and dismantle those so that learners can develop their own critical consciousness and recognise social and educational inequity in the systems that they're in. And then in the third column, this is what we're particularly thinking about today. We have culturally relevant pedagogy. And culturally relevant pedagogy recognises that the education system isn't culture neutral and that there are systemic biases in there, and these might cause learners to underachieve or be marginalised. And the aim of culturally relevant pedagogy is to advocate for incorporating learners' cultures and experiences into the curriculum. An example of those in England are these areas of opportunity for adapting computing resources that I'm going to talk about next. So these are the areas of opportunity that we've developed from existing research. And they're a way of operationalizing the theories of culturally relevant pedagogy. And they're a really hands-on way and practical way of helping educators and content developers to identify how resources can be adapted so they're culturally relevant. So they first of all look at opportunities to think about who is learning computing in the classroom. And that can be finding out about your learners, their backgrounds and their experiences. And that can also be finding out about ourselves as educators and thinking about our own experiences and the lenses that we bring to the education that we give. The second area in green is looking at what we teach. And that's thinking about what content is there in our computing curricula, in our computing schemes of work. Are there opportunities to introduce more culturally relevant content, ideas of social justice and ethics? And then reviewing the context and the examples that we use to teach in. Are there ways that we can bring in more culturally relevant contexts to the things that learners do to practice their skills? The red box with numbers 5 to 9 in, that's where we think about, well, how do we teach computing? And these are 5 areas to reflect on how to make the pedagogy that we use in computing classrooms culturally relevant to learners. Thinking especially about accessibility, promoting opportunities for open-ended and problem-solving activities, thinking about how we can incorporate collaboration and structured group discussion into computing, promoting student agency through giving them some choice as to what they do, and reviewing learning materials that we use and the learning environment, the classroom layout that children are learning in. And then finally, the 10th area of opportunity to use as a prompt is to think about reviewing school policies, school processes and training in your own school or within your own department, and thinking about, are there any sort of areas where they could be made more equitable? Are there any opportunities to underpin the work that's going on in the classroom at a policy level? We do expect that not every adaptation would use all 10 areas of these opportunities. They're there as prompts, and some may be more relevant than others depending on what the situation is. The other theory that we used was an idea called the knowledge appropriation model. And we've used that to explore the different stages that teachers go through in what they learn and how they apply it to their classroom practice. So this is the knowledge appropriation model developed by Lay et al. And it's a way of identifying the different phases that people pass through in order to fully take in new knowledge and embed it in their practice. And you'll notice it's cyclical, it's not linear. It acknowledges that learning isn't always about just taking concrete steps forwards each time. And sometimes we would expect people to go round the loops more than once in order to embed that knowledge into their practice. So there are 3 main cycles in this model. First of all, appropriation, which is about sort of learning the initial knowledge. Secondly, scaffolding, thinking about how you go through the learning process to scaffold what you're learning. And then you move into the left-hand side, which is maturation, which is then describing how that knowledge becomes embedded, standardized into current practice. So this is the model we used in our study to analyse the process of knowledge appropriation by the teachers, and we will return to it later in the presentation. So these were the research questions that we set out to answer in this study. We wanted to find out what effect the professional development activities have, particularly on teachers' confidence, attitudes and perceptions of culturally relevant pedagogy in primary computing lessons. And then secondly, we wanted to explore the extent to which teachers start to appropriate knowledge through these activities. So the study that we've run, that I described to you over a year, we recruited 13 teachers to take part in the study. And we advertised through social media and teacher forums to recruit these teachers. We had 10 who identified as female and 3 as male. 9 of our teachers described their ethnicity as white, 2 as Asian or Asian British, and 1 as Arab. Now, it does feel as if there isn't a great deal of diversity amongst our participants. However, we recognised that actually our participants were more diverse than the statistics of the general teaching population in England. What did surprise us was that we had 5 teachers who were computing specialists. You'll remember I said earlier that primary teachers tend to teach all the different subjects, but we had some teachers taking part who teach computing to lots of different ages of children through primary education. And we think, obviously, this is a lovely opportunity for these teachers to really embed and share their practice with others in their school. It does mean that we have to think about how much we can generalise from this, the findings of this research, and whether it's whether they're appropriate for generalist teachers or specialist teachers or both. So we recruited the teachers and we got them to the workshop, and we did some activities with them for the day. So at the start, it was all in person, by the way. So this is post-COVID times, and we were able to get together all in one room, which at the time felt absolutely lovely because we hadn't been able to do much of that at the time. So at the start of the workshop, we worked as a whole group and we set up activities to explore culturally relevant pedagogy, and we made them deliberately collaborative and participatory. So teachers were taking an active role in the learning, and we deliberately made the choice that we wanted to give them some space to speak about their own professional and personal experiences as part of that as well. After we'd done that, for the rest of the day, we then split into smaller groups. So each of the groups had 1 or 2 researchers working with them, as well as 3 or 4 teachers in the group. And we worked through the areas of opportunity that I shared with you earlier. And we worked through those in turn and asked teachers to examine some resources and note down ideas of how they could be adapted. And you can see a page on the top right there from a booklet that we created. So they could just start recording and noting their ideas. Once we'd done this for a few cycles, we then started getting those ideas and transferring them onto post-it notes on working walls, so it could be really collaborative and start creating adaptation plans. And we finished the day with each of our groups presenting a little plan for how they wanted to see the resources adapted. The resources of work, the units of work that we selected were really carefully selected from an existing large-scale national curriculum resource. So this is a resource that has been written by expert content developers who are really experienced in writing lessons and PowerPoints and resources for teaching computing to primary children. And we selected 2 of the digital media units. A Year 4 unit that was to do with photo editing and introduced skills such as cropping and colouring photos, and a Year 5 unit where students learn skills such as grouping shapes and duplicating objects to create vector graphics. Both units have been designed by this group of experts to appeal to as wide a group of learners as possible, so that they were used in as many different schools as possible. And so they used contexts that were familiar to children, such as nature and animals, to make sure that this could be achieved. We collected data from the teachers before and after the workshop through a survey. And we asked them about their confidence to develop and adapt resources. And we asked them about their attitudes towards culturally relevant pedagogy. And the attitudes used in the survey were adapted from a study run by a team headed up by Joanna Good with some teachers in the US. And then we also asked them some open questions about the barriers and the benefits of using culturally relevant pedagogy in the classroom. So we analysed those. The quant data was using Wilcox and Signed Rank tests, and the qual data was an interpretivist analysis of the questions done by 2 researchers. So what did we learn? Well, with our quantitative data, these were responses on a Likert scale, asking teachers how strongly they agreed or disagreed with a set of statements. And after the workshop, teachers were significantly more confident to adapt resources for themselves so that they were culturally relevant. And you can see on the slide, 10 teachers reported an increased confidence. No teachers reported a decrease in confidence, and 3 stayed the same. And similarly, they were significantly more confident to adapt resources for others as well. 8 of our teachers reported that they felt increasingly confident to adapt resources, and 5 stayed the same. And for both these questions, the median responses rose from teachers having a little confidence to adapt to be very confident to adapt for culturally relevant pedagogy after the workshop. So we also asked teachers about their attitudes and asked them to rate their agreement with these 8 statements. And interestingly, no teacher disagreed with any of the statements before or after the workshop. And we think obviously they self-selected to come to the workshop. They actively chose, with the support of their head teachers, this is what they wanted to do. So we weren't sort of asking them to participate in anything that they felt uncomfortable with or that they disagreed with anyway. So here's one of the statements that teachers were most in agreement with. An important part of being a computing teacher is examining one's own attitudes and beliefs about class, race, gender, disabilities, and sexual orientation. And you can see in the graph, the responses in blue are the pre-workshop responses, and the responses in orange are post-workshop. And you can see 7 teachers increased their agreement with this statement, 6 stayed the same, but you can see how strongly teachers agreed with this after the workshop. Another interesting one that showed a marked increase with the statement 3, which is that part of the responsibility of a computing teacher is to challenge teaching practices that maintain societal inequities. And we had a neutral, some slightly agree, and some strongly agree before the workshop. After the workshop, every single one of the participants said that they strongly agreed with this statement. And finally, as another example that I wanted to just share, this is a statement relating to student choice, which is connected to the areas of opportunity. It's important to allow student choice when designing computing activities. And again, you can see that there were some mixed sort of responses in blue before the workshop, but after the workshop, everybody either slightly agreed or strongly agreed. And what's going to be really interesting with this small sample of teachers is to see if they continue to agree after they've had a go at delivering student choice in the classroom as part of their activities. Because a lot of us on the research team have taught in primary schools ourselves, and we know that that's not an easy thing to achieve. So we're interested to see how these opinions are going to change or whether they're going to stay the same. So from our qual results, the free text responses that we asked in the survey, we looked at those and analysed those, and we derived 4 themes about the workshop. Teachers told us that they felt they had an increased understanding of culturally relevant pedagogy after the workshop. They were really keen to describe some of the benefits that it would have for their learners. They also reflected on translating the learning to their own practice and talked about their eagerness to be able to go back and put it into practice. And then finally, one of the themes that came through really strongly was the benefit of peer discussion. Teachers really appreciated having dedicated time to talk to other teachers about different schools and different areas and different types of things that schools do. And I'll just read out a quote from the bottom here. The dedicated time and value added from peer discourse made this authentic and not just token activities in a box. That's what one of the teachers said on their survey. So when we think about what are these results telling us in relation to computing in education in general, and how does it contribute towards our understanding? First of all, we set out to look at the effect of professional development. We can see the increase in confidence levels that were statistically significant do suggest that teachers have the tools to apply the principles after professional development in their own practice. So we would argue that professional development is really, really important for teachers to make sure that they are fully equipped to go and try out these ideas in their classrooms with their learners. What we also saw was some consistency with the US research done by Joanna Good and her team. teachers' attitudes towards culturally relevant pedagogy changed in a way that was consistent with the US teachers. And this is some initial sort of evidence that suggests this type of professional development will have the same effect, perhaps, regardless of the country that it's delivered in. So we expect that this type of professional development will increase teachers' willingness to examine their own attitudes. It will increase their willingness to challenge inequitable practices. It will increase their willingness to allow student choice, and it will increase their willingness to openly discuss issues relating to inequity with students in the classroom. Remember the knowledge appropriation model that I showed you a few slides back? This is how we analysed the way that teachers appropriated knowledge of culturally relevant pedagogy through the professional development. And we analysed it against the workshop, but as we did so, we realised we had to go back right to the start of the research study, because when we recruited participants and explained an overview of the project, we were beginning to create an awareness about the idea of culturally relevant pedagogy and why it might be beneficial to them. So, as explained, in the morning we had these whole group discussions talking about culturally relevant pedagogy as one large group. And that gave teachers who were further on in their journey of understanding culturally responsive teaching an opportunity to share their experiences and their learning with others. So they were maybe already in the maturation cycle, some of them. But then they came back together in small groups to start to work together to identify ways that the resources could be adapted. And so as each group worked together, they were having to build this shared understanding of what culturally relevant pedagogy means. So that was a really good activity for them to think about things and explain it to each other and check that their understanding was the same. Towards the end of the day, you'll remember that I said that they created a plan of adaptations. And that was around, not only were they thinking about how to adapt the resources, they were actually also adapting their own new knowledge to this specific situation. And we recognise that teachers will continue to appropriate knowledge when they teach in their classrooms, and that they're going to continue to move around these cycles as they deliver the resources. So we're really interested to see how that's going to develop further. So I'm going to leave you with the idea of what's next. So as I mentioned at the start, this project is part of a pilot, and based on this pilot, we can see that providing professional development is a promising approach for helping teachers to increase in confidence to adapt resources so that they're culturally responsive. And we think there are further opportunities to test this approach, for example, maybe with other areas of the computing curriculum, such as programming, perhaps with teachers from other phases of education, such as secondary, and also in other countries as well. And all of the research instruments used in our workshop are available as open access documents with a link. And again, once these slides are shared, you'll be able to have access to those research instruments should you wish to explore them and use them yourself. But for now, that's what we've learned so far about localising professional development in England for computing teachers to help make resources culturally relevant. Thank you for listening. I'm looking forward to discussing more with you in the Q&A, and you can follow more about our work on the website. Thank you very much.
Could we give a huge thank you to Katharine, a huge round of applause, and also, oh yeah, I always forget how to do it. Right, that's right. That's quite nice. That's super. And
thank you.
Yes, thank you for presenting, Katharine. Thanks to our breakout facilitators for facilitating breakout rooms. Thank you for all of you for participating and coming along to the seminar. Just before you leave, we're not quite done yet. We do have an attendee survey. Oh, look at that. It's like clockwork, which we'd like you all to fill in if possible. And it's just to help us sort of improve these seminars and, you know, grow in the future. And if you're interested in what's coming up next, our next seminar is on the 7th of November, it's Tuesday again, and we'll hear from Dr. Aman Yadav from Michigan State University, and he'll be speaking about computational thinking in primary schools. We look forward to seeing you there. Thank you very much for coming along, and thanks again to Katharine for speaking to us.